Right. So just as a part of advanced Python, we are going to have the discussion about what OOPS. So what is the OOPS, my dear friend? Object-oriented programs. What is the object-oriented programs? The programs which are developed by using object-oriented principles, such as encapsulation. Number 2 is inheritance. Number 3 is what? Polymorphism. I repeat, the programs which are developed by using object-oriented principles, such as what? Encapsulation, inheritance, and polymorphism. You don't worry about these three wording. We are going to see them very practically with beautiful examples. So what are the example for the object-oriented programming? Here is a go. C++, Java, .NET, Android, Python. These are the best example for the object-oriented programming. But many interviews, the panel members, they won't ask you what is object orientation. Rather, they will be asking you why object orientation is. Rather, they will be asking you what is object orientation is. Kindly, ladies and gentlemen, just you please check it out. Sir, before object-oriented programming, there is a concept called what your friend procedure-oriented programming. Ladies and gentlemen, more attention is required. Sir, just before object-oriented programming, there is a concept called what your friend procedure-oriented programming, or we can say what your friend function-oriented programming. So what do you mean by function-oriented programming? Yes, in the function-oriented programming, the logics are maintained and manipulated. In the what your friend function-oriented programming, logics are maintained and manipulated in the form of what your friend function. Example, sir, here I am defining what your friend DEF. ABC is one function I am defining here. So just there is a one more function DEF. What's it? MNY is a function. MNY is a function I am defining here. But writing x equal to 10 or something like, we have some code I am writing here. The same way, DEF, what your friend MNO or ABC, and what your friend there is a something like XYZ. So in the what? In the procedure orientation or in the what your friend function orientation, the logics are maintained and manipulated. Ladies and gentlemen, the logics are maintained and manipulated in the form of what your friend, the logics are maintained and manipulated in the form of functions. That is the point you need to understand first. Why should I go with what your friend object-oriented programming? So if anyone question you, sir, before object-oriented programming, there is a beautiful concept is there for you, is what your friend procedure-oriented, or we can say function-oriented. Sir, in the function orientation, the logics are maintained and manipulated. Sir, the logics are maintained and manipulated in the form of what your friend, in the form of functions. In the form of what your friend, in the form of function. So now what is the function? You don't worry. Function is a self-contained block. So what is a gentleman? Function is a what your friend? Function is a self-contained block having a statements or group of statements to perform what your friend, to perform the particular task. Yes, a function is a self-contained block having a statements or group of statements to perform the particular task. This is a matter, right? Okay. But here in the what your friend, in the function oriented programming, there is a concept of what your friend, local variable and global variable. My dear friend, local variable and global variable. So what is a local variable? A variable which is declared within a function. Guys, kindly requesting you, a variable which is declared within a function, the variable can be used in the function only. Call it as what your friend, local variable. So, okay, the points to be understand. Why should I go with the object-oriented programming? Before object-oriented programming, we have the concept of what your friend, procedure-oriented programming. In the procedure-oriented programming, the logics are maintained and manipulated in the form of what? Functions. Now, what is a function? A function is a self-contained block having a statements or group of statements to perform the particular task. But friend, in the procedure orientation, we have the concept of what? Local and global variables. So what is a local variable? Guys, a variable which is declared within a function, and the variable can be used in the function only. Call it as what your friend, local variable. A variable which is declared within a function, the variable can be used in the function only. Call it as what your friend, local variable. But sometimes by the time of developing the application, we may require the common data across more than one function. We may require the common data across more than one function. Then we need to declare them, what here friend, we need to declare them as a global variable. Yes, this is called as what here friend, global variable. What do you mean by a global variable? A variable which is declared outside of all the functions. A variable which is declared outside of all the function is called what here friend, global variable. The global variable can be used what throughout the module. Here module is nothing but the program or script file. So ladies and gentlemen, I hope you guys understood, right? So by the time of developing the programs, sometimes we may require the common data across more than one function. Okay, then we need to declare them as a what here friend, global variable. So the global variables are what the problem? The global variables are freely floating across all the modules in the system. So freely floating across all the modules in the system. That means what here friend, that variable y we can use into ABC, MNO, XYZ. If required, this global variable, we can also use them into the super function. But actually my requirement is, ladies and gentlemen, here my requirement is, I want to restrict the variable y to access in the function super. My requirement is like that. The point number one here, global variables are freely floating across all the modules in the system. We cannot provide any restrictions on the data. My requirement here in this context is the variable y should not allow me to access in the function super. Variable y should not allow me to access in the function super. Is there any provisions are given for you in the C language? Why I'm saying C language? Because the best example for the procedure orientation is your C language. Well, coming to what your core Python is also, so far you have learned this type of mechanism only. The core Python, what you did, you have defined the functions and we use the logics. But can you provide any restrictions on the data in the procedure orientation? Absolutely no. We can't provide any restrictions on the data, and we can't provide the security for the data because the data is freely floating across all the modules. So the data security is not possible because we can't provide any restrictions, thus we can't provide the security for the data. This is what the problem with the procedure orientation. This is what the problem with what your friend procedure orientation. Then what is the remedy? Sir, how can I gonna provide the data restriction? So just whatever the limitations are there in the procedure orientation, there is a beautiful concepts are introduced. In object oriented programming. So then next one is what your friend just oops are introduced, right? In fact, this object oriented programs is introduced in the year of 1980s. Actually, this oops is not the new one. This is very, very old. 1980s onwards only the object orientation is existed in the IT world. Right, my dear. But sir, what is there in the object-oriented program? Yes. So in the object-oriented programming, yes, sir. In the object-oriented programming, data is nothing but what? Variables. In the object-oriented programming, the data and what your friend required functions. So just what your friend in the object-oriented programming, data and what your friend, the data and the required functions. The data and what your friend required functions are closely bound together. Notice, ladies and gentlemen, requesting you all. So in the what your friend in the object oriented programming, the data and required functions are closely bound together. The data and the required functions are what your friend closely bind together. Closely bind together is a single unit. Closely bind together as a single unit, which is technically called as encapsulation. Which is technically called as what your friend encapsulation. Yes, kindly observe this. What is there in the object orientation? In the object orientation, the data and the required functions are closely bound together as a single unit, which is technically called as encapsulation. That's it. So now what is the encapsulation? If anyone question you, encapsulation is the process of grouping the data required function. Encapsulation is the process of grouping the data and the required functions together as a single unit. Call it as what your friend encapsulation. Ladies and gentlemen, if you notice, these all are the best example for the what your friend object-oriented programming. These all are the best example for object-oriented programming. But none of these languages, we are not having the keyword called encapsulation. So none of those languages is not having the keyword. Please understand my words. None of the above languages are not having the keyword called encapsulation. No keyword, no programming word, encapsulation. So actually encapsulation is the one theory. Encapsulation is the process of grouping the data and required functions together as a single unit. Technically call it as encapsulation. Okay, fine. But let me check that really do we have the encapsulation keyword in the Python or not? Let me check. But we didn't have the keyword called encapsulation. To know the list of keywords, first import the keyword module. In the keyword module, there is a one variable called a KW list. When you type KW list, you'll be getting the list of keywords. But have you find any keyword called encapsulation? And all the list of keywords are appear in front of you in the alphabetical order. You can see that. But have you find any keyword called encapsulation? No, Baba. We didn't have the keyword called encapsulation. No. But sir, there is a question, then how can we encapsulate the data and functions together? So this is okay, the theory is fine, sir. So what is, how can we encapsulate the data and functions together as a single unit? Yes, my dear, which is practically possible by using the beautiful keyword called class. That is a matter. Yes. So just what your friend, theoretically encapsulation, practically possible by using what your friend class. That's it, my dear friend. Don't worry about it. So now you please tell me what is encapsulation? Process of grouping the data and required functions together as a single unit is technically called as what your friend encapsulation, but which is practically possible by using the keyword class. Practically possible by using the keyword class. Ladies and gentlemen, see the variables which are writing. The variables which are writing in the class is actually call it as what you know. They are called it as fields. They are called it as what your friend just fields. The variables which are writing instead of the class is called it as what you know fields. The functions which are defined in the class. The functions which are defined in the class is called what your friend methods. This is what the point. I hope now you got the point. What is the methods? The methods are nothing but the functions which are defined in the class is called methods. The variables which are declared in the class is called what? Fields. But both are combinedly call it as what you know attributes. Both are combinedly call it as attributes. Attributes means they are the members of the class, it seems. Attributes. Pleasing your dear, terminologies really matters. This is where I come. So I hope you guys are understood. Sir, okay, fine. So what is the benefit of defining the encapsulation? Yes, now I am coming to that point only. Now you can observe this. Here I want to define one function, def. That is the what here friend super is called what now? It is called it as a function. It is not the method. Because is it the member of the class or outside of the member? It is the non-member of the class. If any non-member functions, if any non-member functions are existed, they are called as what your friend functions. I hope now you got more clarity about what is the function and method. Say, okay, the function means what your friend, that is not the part of the class. That is not the part of the class. It is a part of the program. But method means that is the part of the class. I hope now you understood right. So ladies and gentlemen, what is encapsulation, right? Encapsulation is a process of grouping the data and the required functions together as a single unit, technically call it as encapsulation, which is practically possible by using the keyword class. My dear friend, the variables which are declared in the class is called as what your friend fields. The functions which are defined in the class is called as methods. So come on, the fields, the variables which are declared in the class is called what your friend fields. The functions which are defined in the class is called what your friend methods. Yes. Fields are used to hold the values. Fields are used to hold the values. Methods are used to manipulate the values. Can you notice that fields are used to hold the values? Methods are used to what your friend manipulate the values. That's enough. Sir, so what is the benefit, sir? What is the benefit of grouping the data and functions together as a single unit? Now here is the goal, ladies and gentlemen. We are requesting you understand the flows very easy. So just now you can observe this. Sir, the data. So ladies and gentlemen, the data which is taken within the bound. I mean to say the data which is taken within the bound, this data can be accessed by the functions. This data can be accessed by the functions which are existed in the bound only, but this data cannot be accessed outside of the bound. Yes, this data cannot be accessed, what cannot be accessed outside of the bound. This type of data restriction, this data cannot be accessed outside of the bound. This data cannot be accessed outside of the bound. This type of data restrictions are technically called it as data abstraction. This is what we can say. Data abstraction, that is a matter. Now you please tell me, sir, what is the data abstraction? Data abstraction is a process of restricting the data or providing the security for the data. Yes. So I hope now you understood, right? So the data which is taken within the bound, the data can be accessed by the functions existed in the bound only, but this data cannot be accessed outside of the bound. This type of data restrictions are technically called it as data abstraction. But sir, how can we achieve the data abstraction, sir? Yes. So just what here, friend, how can we achieve the data abstraction? Ladies and gentlemen, data abstraction is possible by using access what here, friend, access modifiers. Data abstraction, data abstraction can be achieved by using what here, friend, access modifier. So what are the access modifiers? There is some access modifiers like private modifier is there. There is something like protected modifier is there, and public modifier is there. So okay, just what your friend, these are the access modifiers is provided in what your friend Python. So what is that now? Just what is the data abstraction? So data abstraction is a process of providing the restrictions on the access restrictions on the data. It is practically possible by using access modifiers. In Python, we have three access modifiers, my dear friend: private, protected, public. Okay, private, protected, what your friend, public. So here I want to cover you small points. Again, ladies and gentlemen, but we are not having the keywords like private, protected, public in Python. But okay, we are not having any keywords like private, protected, public in Python. Let me open this Python. I want to show you the list of keywords once again. Import what here, friend, just a keywords. Import keyword module. Just what here, friend, just a keyword dot what here, friend, KW list. When you press enter, we have seen the list of keywords in front of you. Have you find any keyword with the name private, protected, public? No, because you can see all the keywords are appear in front of you in alphabetical order. But have you find any keywords like public, private, protected? We have only the keyword with the letter P is what your friend passed, but there is no private, protected, public. Then how can you provide the data restrictions in Python? Oh guys, we have some separate lesson, data abstraction in Python. I'll be showing you. But time being, do remember, if any variable is declared with the two underscores, that is called private members. If any variable declared with what your friend two underscores starts with the two underscore, that is a private member in Python. If any variable is preceded by only underscore, it is a protected member. If any variable no underscores, then it is called public members. Now you can observe this. You please tell me y and x is the public members or private members? Public members. So what is the private, protected, public? That will be discussed in another future lesson. That is data abstraction. Up to that, don't worry about it. Don't worry about it, my dear. But here, is it possible to provide the data restrictions or not? Means absolutely yes. We can provide the data abstraction in Python. Okay, fine. But sir, one more point I would like to share you one point here. See the procedure orientation. In the procedure orientation, the global data is freely floating across what your friend all the modules in the system. The global data is freely floating across all the modules in the system, but whereas in object orientation, but in the object orientation, the data which is taken within the bound can be accessed by the functions which are exist in the bound, but this data cannot be accessed outside of the bound, even though they are the part of the program. This type of data restrictions are technically called as data abstraction. That is the point. In the procedure orientation, we can't provide the restriction. In the object orientation, we can provide the restrictions. Number one. Number two, my dear friend, if we make any changes in the global data, if we make any changes in the global data, that will be reflected to what your friend, that will be reflected to throughout the program. If we make any changes in the global data, it will be reflected to throughout the program. But very fortunately, if we make any changes in the, data existed in the bound, that will be reflected to some part of the program, but not for entire application. I repeat, if you make any changes in the global data, that will be reflected to what your friend throughout the program, but in the procedure orientation. But in object orientation, if you make any changes in the if you make any changes in the data existed in the bound, that will be reflected to some part of the area, but not for some part of the application, but not for entire application. That is the point here. So ladies and gentlemen, now you understood, right? Basically with the object orientation, what we can do, we can provide the data abstraction. Now you please tell me dear, what is the encapsulation? Sir, encapsulation is a process of grouping the data and the required functions together as a single unit. Call it as what? Encapsulation. Well, what is the advantage of encapsulation? Sir, advantage of encapsulation is data abstraction. What do you mean by data abstraction? Providing the data restrictions. Sir, how can you achieve the encapsulation, sir? By using the class. By using the word class, we can achieve the data. Okay, encapsulation. How can you achieve the data abstraction? Sir, we can achieve the data abstraction by using what your friend private, protected, public modifiers. That is the point. As I said, you, my dear friend, now you have got the point here. In the process orientation, there is no data restriction. In object orientation, we can provide some data restrictions. In the process orientation, if we make any changes in the global data, will be reflected to throughout the module. But if we make any changes in the data exist in the bound, it will be reflected to some part of the program, but not for entire application. That is what the advantage of what your friend just oops. In object orientation, we can provide some data restriction. Thus, it will improve the data security. And if we make any changes in the data, it will be reflected to some part of the program, but not for what? Entire application. This is all about what your friend just only I discussed with you about encapsulation. This is all about what your friend encapsulation. Regarding that inheritance and polymorphism will be discussed about your friend in an upcoming sessions. So just what your friend inheritance and polymorphism will be discussed in what? In upcoming sessions. I hope you guys got the point very clear about what is a encapsulation, how can we achieve the encapsulation, and the advantage of what your friend encapsulation. That's it, my dear friend. Is it clear?